nation was first founded, all 13 states permitted slavery. But by the end of the Revolutionary War, several northern states started to abolish it. The North replaced its workforce with immigrants while the South stayed dependent on slavery over the course of history. With the Age of Enlightenment, people began to question the morality of slavery, and the North and South began to draw boundaries like the Mason-Dixon Line, the Northwest Ordinance, and the Missouri Compromise to control the balance between slave states and non-slave states. With the invention of a cotton gin by Eli Whitney in 1796, the slave trade as well as the cotton industry boomed, and both increased. The South pretty much stayed dependent on slavery, and in 1808, slave trade was abolished. Slaves even actually began to be bred domestically for profit. That wasn't even completely abolished until later in 1865.
The movement officially started in 1829 when the appeal was written by a freed slave named David Walker. His book encouraged slaves to rise up against their masters and to take their freedom by force. The next phase happened in 1831 with a weekly newspaper called Liberator, which only focused on the issue of abolishing slavery. The publisher of the Liberator was white and had a different approach to ending slavery. His approach was nonviolent. William Lloyd Garrison played on people's moral values and said slavery was a sin and a crime against humanity. Later that same year, a slave named Nat Turner led the biggest slave rebellion in history. The rebellion lasted a week. 60 people were killed, and many more were executed by the authorities in Virginia. This rebellion led to the slave codes, which made it illegal for slaves to read and write. In 1833, the AASS was formed, which was the American Anti-Slavery Society. In 1835 and 1836, Congress passed 2 laws to limit the effectiveness of the abolition movement. The government couldn't stop them from free speech, but they could stop them from using the U.S. mail to send out anti-slavery materials. In the 1840s, Frederick Douglass became the leading speaker against slavery. Being a former slave, he had first-hand experience. During the 1840s and 1850s, the Underground Railroad was running slaves to freedom. The Underground Railroad was not as it seemed. It was a secret network of abolitionists and anti-slavery sympathizers to help slaves escape across the Mason-Dixon line.
In addition to the abolitionist movement and Underground Railroad, Harriet Beecher Stowe published a shocking novel about slavery called Uncle Tom's Cabin. It was a work of fiction. It was based upon Southern newspapers, reports of actual events in the lives of various slaves. It showed the cruelty and humanity of the slave system. Uncle Tom's Cabin hit the nation like a ton of bricks. By the 1830s, a full-blown movement had emerged to end slavery in America. Their arguments fell into 2 categories, religion and rationalism. The abolitionists argued that God did not condone slavery from a religious view, and from a rationalist view, they said that America was too educated, too knowledgeable, too enlightened to take a step backward towards barbarism and slavery. Well, the Southerners had a different response. They had an answer for that. Their rationalist view was that it was necessary evil. Black slaves needed time of schooling. They simply would not prepare for self-rule and independence. And their religious view was that some of the greatest men of the Old Testament were slave owners. And why was it all right for men of God in the Bible to own slaves and sexual concubines, but men of God today could not? Slavery was an ongoing argument between the slavocracy and abolitionists until it tore the country apart and began the Civil War.